A careful bold hypothesis. Reasonable doubt subversion history. Hello everyone, I Chun Chipeng. Again today to help you subvert history. What today's theme is to subvert it. That is the plague. Speaking, everyone will smell the mere mention of plague. Because it causes casualties. Often not a single case, but large-scale deaths. However, historical data in China had a long record of plague. Like, say here in Zhou. There are 4 seasons. Jia mentioned that Pandora illness. And Lu also mentioned that there. Season spring bank daylight saving people is more than epidemics. From the historical point of view, the two we can learn to say. In fact, for the ancient plague, there is a considerable degree of understanding. They know what to say. Seasons 4 seasons plague has occurred. But they think the reason is because the plague. There are non-gas caused. That indeed true. Because plague is a kind of natural disaster. But the plague under special circumstances tend to spread. And in this particular case, most are man-made. Or else people off guard. Or more frightening is deliberate result. Of course you will ask. History of plague like this is a man-made disaster caused by it. Oh there. As we mentioned before. When the topic traitor. There is a special mention. Western Han Dynasty eunuch named Bank of China said that because of dissatisfaction, was sent to escort the emperor and pro. So put down the words of Han Dynasty to the negative. Then he went to the other side after Hun. Really helped since the Han Dynasty Huns unfavorable. That was how he helped it. He said it should be advocated to launch germ warfare. Recommend Attila had the plague cattle and sheep thrown into the water. Let the Han army sick. Then we have to ask, Attila is the Huns. Later, there is no accepted. Also flourish, turn it into chemical and biological weapons. That is how he did it. In fact, it was the Chinese-Hungarian War. Emperor want is Hun horses. Hun obediently to offer horses. Say you want, I'll give you horses. You do not hit me again. But you do think they have so kind. It did not. At that time they secretly in these horses poisoned. So says historical data. Hun wizards in these horses up and down insanity. This insanity under very special. It does not attack the horses and sheep. But after death it will spread. Such a disease. In fact, for now, it should be a bird flu. Chinese medicine called typhoid. But such a bird flu. Plague caused. But later received clearance in people. They joyfully. There are horses that gave us a good after I did not expect to accept. Really it caused a plague pandemic. So that people in the off heavy casualties. But since useful. Of course, not Hun used only once. So then after another. Han army to attack the Huns. Hun them a call north. Huns moved westward to north. After he moved westward after another. Under such a manner insanity. Han army to stop the pursuit. Of course, makes the military's attack was one of stagnation. But you know. Such a culture virus. Is actually a double-edged sword. This is very typical of what we call. The concept of self-injury hurt the enemy 170. The results of such a plague. Then they do not spread after careful. Because they do not have any idea of vaccination well, in the process of training, accidentally let it slip out diffused. Well he ran, the results of their migratory everywhere, the plague will spread everywhere. When the 2nd century AD, in West Asia to spread. By the time, the 6th century AD, Europe also suffered spread. It is said that Europe is affected and to what extent it. At that time England. Actually there is not enough manpower health to help carry the remains. Then you can imagine how serious harm plague. So it is not only the Huns used in the Han Dynasty army to stop chasing. And later became a full spread of chemical and biological weapons in Europe. Of course everyone will be curious to say, only this time it does not really. Since the national grasslands with this began to understand witchcraft. That is, use these viruses do chemical and biological weapons to form the plague. Of course, it will extend handed down later to the time of Genghis Khan. Once again attack. Temujin Genghis Khan. He was in AD 1206. Unified prairie tribes. Later, external campaign, thereby establishing his descendants. Empire spanning Europe and Asia. At that time the empire. Mongol Empire into 4. Golden Horde into Ogade. Han Chagatai with Iraqi children. One of the Golden Horde. You can see it on the Black Sea coast. Of course it hopes to extend its tentacles. So he always wanted to play it on the Black Sea. Crimea Peninsula to the other side. Above Crimea Peninsula, there is a city called the City of Kaffa, now called Theodosia. So the city of Theodosia, ancient name card law. This card law, that city. There were originally stationed Muslims. Subsequently, some of the Italian businessmen came here. The forces of the two parties began to dispute. The Italian businessman Muslims killed. That these Muslims. Grasslands are a number of ethnic minorities. Talk to Golden Horde ran for help. You've come to help us, then. We should be willing to do within Golden Horde. Just no opportunity to expand influence. With this attack would come in the name of the city of Kaffa. We know that. The Mongol army was very brave and skilled. Everyone will say curious. Kaffa city have beaten him down yet. In fact, say not so easy. Because of the very high Kaffa city walls. But also strong resistance from defenders. So the Mongol armies that actually for a year. Whole year have not hit down. Fight for it no problem. Later, the Mongol armies still plague outbreak. Pop from strange diseases. Once the soldiers contracted the strange disease. Will be cold chills. But also convulsions attack. Died when? Who will appear dark blue? So many soldiers died when they called heavy damage. But even the heavy damage. Battle or fight right. So they hit the edge. There is a Mongolian soldier on a whim. We say that because of this strange disease, so many people died. Then we let the residents of the city of Kaffa to have a taste of this bitter fruit good. So then, Mongolia coach accepted this proposal. They will use the trebuchet. These got sick and died. Mongolia remains of soldiers to the city going invested in it. At that time the soldiers guarding the city to see Mongol armies not to throw stones. But when the soldiers, they think it should be the first time. Mongols of black magic or curse. But they are not worried. He said that since we have God's blessing, do not be afraid of people with black magic curse. This is because the weak concept of prevention. Let these soldiers who viruses began to spread. Did not take long. It makes the whole city became a ghost town Kava. Because almost all die out. Finally, it is said that only a few hundred people remaining. The remaining hundreds of people in the city of Kaffa. It should be a very good attack, right? But to say is interesting that Mongol armies did not play down the cards to the city. Because they did not wait until the city who died. And that they cannot stand these casualties. Besides the first withdrawal, so after they leave. The remaining corporate cards did not dare stay inside the city. Because although there is no threat of Mongol armies. But the city also terrible plague. So they want to escape. Where it fled. They fled to the Italian origin. After so they packed up the burden. Sailing on the ride, about 10 bar while several Italian return. But you know, these viruses have had them. The results of these viruses in the process of return of one after another disease. The results of these cards on board legal. Therefore suffered heavy casualties. You know that Italy return. How many boats do only? 102. although only 2, but returned to Italy. The results make this strange disease came to the Italian island of Sicily began to spread. Because these ships. There are also those originally in the city of Kaffa. Germs, there are rats with fleas. These germs that brought the fleas with rats. After it came scurrying around Sicily. The result of this scurrying and causing Italian side outbreak of plague. But not only Italy. Later, all occupied Europe. Later, the fall of how many people you know? It died because of this strange disease. There are a total of 25 million people across Europe. Was the third of the population in Europe. You think. The entire 1/3 of Europeans hang. You see how terrible the situation. But do you think that only 1/3? It was also not spread to North Africa. So then ins and outs of total. The illness caused by a total of 75 million people reborn. This is the time you. Abnormal popular range. That talking about this. If you react fast, then immediately think this is what strange is medieval. Europeans dreaded Black Death. So this game Black Death really be called a human catastrophe. Europeans later specially called it the whip of God. Because casualties caused is too heavy. One also because of abnormal discoloration. Of course they also have some methods of control, so they later appeared in a very special doctor called a bird's beak doctors. Because the bird's beak doctors is dedicated to the prevention and treatment of plague, is also known as plague doctors. That this bird's beak doctors, they are equipped with this one. Do you feel you look very weird? They think that this equipment is this strange disease prevention? Can escape the pursuit of death. How to say? In fact, this one equipment. It looks like just a symbolic image of a strange. But in fact, each site has a practical effect. Have a protective effect. Let's look at it in black brim. It's black brim. The one that protect the head. And secondly, as a doctor specializing in logo. So we saw this black brim. The doctor came to know the beak. The second is that it is the most significant feature. It is the beak. That this bird's beak is also not just for decoration. It is actually a gas mask. Among the bird's beak, stuffed with herbs with spices. That virus can be avoided. Or bacteria infection. At the same time his face. His eyes are red sight transparent glass. Then this red transparent glass, in fact, in order to block the evil. Their argument is that denial of evil, but in fact it was full compliance with modern medicine. To avoid being infected cornea. The situation with the right approach. In addition, you can notice his clothes are covered from head to toe. His feet wearing leather pants. The purpose is to be the body's skin wrap. To prevent virus infection. Further inside robe. Also painted suet or wax. There is also a protective effect of gloves on their hands. And the gloves also waxed. Because they are also responsible for the anatomical body. In fact, says will be worried. Virus infection remains on his hands. So the gloves. In fact, somewhat similar to like the concept of surgical gloves. At the same time, they have a walking stick. This cane is doing it. It is striking to those patients suffering from the disease. Because those patients will require them to treat. Will always come along on. Even touch them. So they will use this wooden stick. To beat them. These patients to prevent bacteria. Came to them. Everybody, they hear the effect of such equipment. Do you think? In fact, we are now with the doctor's protective clothing, their meditation right. Okay, but such a beak Western doctors. In the end, there is not functioning yet. In fact, there is no way to fully play a role. Why? Since these physicians beak More than half have no expertise. Just to trickster. Because a lot of people got sick after. It is becoming a sudden illness. Beak see a doctor. Will offer large sums of money. I hope he treat himself. So there are some unscrupulous believers. It has deliberately body and equipment. To pretend to be a very capable. In fact, there is no treatment that the ability of. At the same time, they have to deal with the bodies responsible for. So it is interesting that. Although they are responsible for treatment of patients, in order to combat the plague is, but their presence. Often accompanied by the deceased, so later extended spread. Body and equipment has become the incarnation of death. So then, we are a lot of dramatic or comic inside. Some will find that they're unworthy of the believers. As it is the image of death to earthly. Western doctors have carried out such a beak prevention. Then we have to ask is, ancient Chinese have no concept of prevention of it. That of course is there. In fact, in the very early days. There is the so-called party fortune teller for mad husband. The four parties fortune teller who is mad husband. It is driven by disease demons. So Zhou Xia official mentioned that there are. The fortune teller that he would square palm Mongolia bearskin. For golden eyes Xianyi Zhutong executive Guiyang shield. Everybody. You see him wearing such a. In fact, a little taste of protective clothing. You can will palm Mongolia bearskin. That's who he will be wearing bearskin. Dressed in bearskin, 4 golden eyes. His eyes are not really gold. 4 eyes. But he should be wearing a mask like. Zhu Xianyi sang. That his body. There are red and black clothes as a protection. He also has executive Goyan shield. There are a number of weapons in the hands of. In fact, you do not think there is a. The bird's beak with a doctor's dress. Also somewhat similar, right? But their body and equipment. Mainly to pray for the gods to expel disease demons. So then later extended spread. Also appeared in the so-called Nua opera. Is to see a person a hard. That idea is the Nua opera, is somewhat similar to like, the meaning of witchcraft dance. Of course, this is not the only one. Voodoo dance, in ancient times they. There are some methods to expel disease demons. Some like they would pray for education. Some are dragon boat races. So we now dragon boat racing is a kind of folk. But in the year. But the expulsion of a method of disease demons. Like, say their brine begun. Is actually a disease demons expelled. Plague way to drive. But you heard here no. These rituals or these folk. It only able to reassure. Cannot play a role in the actual. That in the end when. Have a real epidemic as it. In fact, at the latest when the Han Dynasty has developed a. This efficient way isolation. So we can see. Among the historical data mentioned that there are people who epidemics homes empty dd. It also represents a say, at that time they put these sick people isolated in an empty room inside. As these is to avoid spread of the disease. So at least to the Han Dynasty. There have been isolated concept like this. And when the northern and southern dynasties. He also became its implementation system. Because when the northern and southern dynasties, there are 6 so-called disease museum. The 6 diseases museum is actually southern Qi Wangling. When Hui founded with the crown prince. The 6 of their disease museum is treated specially those had the plague patients. It can be considered an isolated manner. Now I know they are not. To isolate this subset management. In the northern and southern dynasties time, already know. As for those who died had the plague. How to do it, the way they are taken. Burying the remains focused buried. So when the northern and southern dynasties. Liang said the book had mentioned. Ying City actually has more than 10 million population. But after the plague. These 7 or 8 out of 10 people dead. That is probably the only 2 or 3% of people survive. Emperor Wu was special to be compassionate. Every person dead. They gave a good coffin for burial. then you will certainly ask say, it is simply a good heart to do his coffin. In fact, he gave his coffin after. Is good to landfills. Do not let these bodies. The plague then diffuse out. So in fact, talking about this, say you have not found. In fact, the ancient concept of prevention, already taking shape, there is no good. Of course, some of the herbs of traditional Chinese medicine will be developed. See if I can plague prevention and control of these. Like, say even. There will be some folk remedies. Su Shi and Wang Mingzhong have mentioned that inside the book was 3 drums with ginger. Non-xerexia effect all those, that these 3 things. Take it after drinking boiled, it is effective to prevent plague. Cease cultivation recorded that the Yuan Dynasty also mentioned that Yuan army epidemics occur. Then rhubarb treatment of the nearly 10,000 people live. He is the rhubarb to treat plague. Later, nearly 1 million people therefore alive. Well, this is a very specific recipe. Plague can be treated. Even extends to later. Folklore of drinks. Is said to also have control effectiveness plague. The most classic case is the plum juice. Talked about going sour plum. Ming Dynasty novel called Heroes. Inside Brigade said recorded. The emperor was young. Once picked ebony to sell. Hubei Shenyang city to result when there a major plague. Zhu Yuanzhang do not care too ill. Lying in the inn. Cannot come out for days. So because there is no effort to get out of bed well. So how do hunger and thirst? Players had to be approved to sell ebony. Eat it to quench their thirst, stop hunger. The results of this eating actually feel refreshed. Look awfully a lot. He just wanted to say. Could ebony can prevent plague? So he put the ebony water to drink. Results of drinking disease actually good, yeah. He just wanted to say is not effective on their own. So he put the rest of ebony. Also boiled plum juice is sour plum. To other sick people to eat. The results of other people drinking gradually recovered. He said suddenly realized. Originally these plum juice. There is a specific effect of prevention and treatment of plague, so he granted to the ebony. All of these patients relief. Later, he also got inspiration. That. Since ebony so effective against plague. Where there is a plague, that I go out into where to go. Specializing in selling ebony, one can plague prevention. And secondly, can also accumulate wealth. So he later sell the. He actually turned into anti-Yuan uprising for military. Do you feel you? This is a windfall. And he. Not only selling when will drink ebony. Because you have to plague prevention and control. He is taking the first thing. So he developed a habit of drinking plum juice. Even if he later expensive to emperor. He just kept drinking is not wrong. So this story. Later extended spread folk. It became popular folk. Began selling sour plum good. So now if you go to the old Beijing. That plum. Street vendors selling plum juice to see. They stand in front. There is usually a crescent moon shovel. This is actually a tribute to the emperor crescent moon shovel. Because the emperor had been a monk. At the same time, this crescent moon shovel. It is the middle there is on the word. Because there are crescent is to represent the next day. That is, representing the creation of Ming Dynasty. So they actually use this crescent moon shovel. To pay tribute to the emperor, but this version. Although that speaks clearly and logically. But some people questioned, because the emperor, in particular, are less likely to grant this ebony, because there is no historical data comes, there is also a plum to say that R&D. Qianlong invention. But I later checked the historical data. Plum juice not only appears to the emperor era. Appeared very early. Among the early Zhou had called sixth drink. The sixth drink. There is a beverage drink ebony. Also known as plum juice. In view of this folklore. Although it is made very clearly and logically justified. But it seems unlikely to coincide with the facts. But there appears the legend also confirms two things. One, that is, people are avoiding fear of plague. Secondly, there is also a plague epidemic prevention treatment, nothing method their utmost. So that would later become the plum juice. Good causes and prevention of plague remedies. But despite countless efforts to make people spend to plague prevention, but the plague still occurs after another. And the vast majority are also caused by man-made. Like the Great Plague took place in the late Ming. And even there is a saying. Ming said that the mouse off, that is, the demise of the Ming Dynasty is by rats. This is how it happened. This mutation occurred from the late Ming in weather talk. Ming Dynasty was getting cold climate. Because the mutation occurred thing, there is no result after a cold rain. No rain has caused droughts, under the drought has caused a famine. People face famine. Start by digging the bark and roots. Dig. Scraping the bark roots. After the roots have finished with the bark. How to do it? They crooked brains move to a biological body. This creature is the mouse. Because mice have the habit of storing food. So they dig rat hole. The mice Tibetan food for eating. What if even the rat's possession of these foods? After all, how to do it? Well, then eat rats. Anyhow, it is about cooking, is a delicious thing. That finished, how to do it? They say the unexpected discovery, side of the road on the road to full multi-rat, although dead. But if the food is to die soon as well. And they had to eat the. After the results they cook and eat, this next eat bad. Why these mice may fall ill in the street? Because they who have the plague bacillus. The results of this plague will spread. Caused a plague. That the plague. The problem is that these victims ate these dead rat. It will not stay in the same place. They will migrate to find food everywhere, so everywhere. You know the result. The plague outbreak had here in Shaanxi. Did not take long to spread to neighboring provinces. Which has a province, or we are familiar with a person's home. This person is Li Zicheng, so then why is led by Li Zicheng? Rebels to attack the city of Beijing. Because his hometown. Well, also spread the plague. So we come back to this plague. The plague not only is spread in neighboring Shaanxi province. Imperial also did not take long to spread. Beijing is the forbidden city here. At that time, residents of Beijing's forbidden city. The disease is called lump disease. Because then got plague will play a bun. And once it is formed, buns. Incurable. Not long will the disease killed. After the outbreak of the plague was Beijing. You know how it exaggerated the number of casualties. It is said that every day there are thousands of people die. And they carried the coffin of the carriage. Actually stuffed with 9 gates. You see how exaggerated the number of casualties. Therefore, according to statistics record time. Mingshi has mentioned that. About how many of them died of it last? Almost 20 million workers. People do not talk like this would be more. Guarding the forbidden city of the Ming army. At that time the Ming army. Guarding the 100,000 people here in the capital. But also spread the plague. Later only 50,000 people. So then the rebel army Li Zicheng. Fight over time, a serious shortage of manpower at all. They even inside the imperial eunuch. Dragged out to help the defense is not enough. But these 5 people inside. In fact, even his combat power less than a Chengdu. Why? This is because the remaining 50,000 troops out, they are not had the plague. Just because slightly stronger physique barely survive. However, after such a serious illness that they are just equal to linger well. So you know. In fact, Li Zicheng's peasant army rabble. They have no way to resist the Ming army. So before attacking Beijing, they are fun to play around the Ming army. Fled everywhere, but when they come to attack Beijing, actually hit down 2 days. How can that be possible? Because defenders of the Ming army also suffered the plague spread. So 500,000 army Li Zicheng can be so easily put imperial that it beat down. So later scholars, in exploring the Ming Dynasty double death of, are considered to be the result of natural disasters coupled with man-made. But all agree, mice are overwhelmed by the Ming Dynasty. The last straw. I do not know whether you agree. That happened late Ming plague. Coincidentally, Qing Dynasty also has a large plague. Qing plague, where is it? Northeast Harbin, this place. But also caused the death of 60,000 inhabitants. This is how it happened. When in November 1910 it would have mentioned. At that time, northeast outbreak of plague. After the outbreak and rapid spread. Hurry to catch mice. To detect above to see if there is plague bacillus. As a result of the plague bacillus has been a hotbed of the plague of rats. There's no virus test. You good. Since the virus cannot find. Do not know how to prevent. I do not know how to prevent. This is what to do next. The plague made up and down the Qing imperial court. Is panic at such a critical time. A man jumped out. This person is Right Chang Zi, Department of State. Zi volunteered, say, I am willing to serve as Minister of Prevention. And he will set up epidemic prevention. He recommended a person to serve as president. He recommended the person named Wu Lianda. He is actually Malaysian Chinese. A young man, medical school. And later to England to study in France and Germany. University of Cambridge have had a doctorate in medicine. You see, there is no powerful. After that he got a degree. Later went back to practice medicine in Malaysia. Chance encounter was Z. Because Z. Qing Dynasty is the first ambassador. Later, two people talk. It is very, very impressed, admire. So then he returned home after Wu Lianda to recommend Yuan. Later, Wu Lianda are invited to come. Served as a post. Tianjin is the deputy superintendent of the Army Medical School. Deputy superintendent here is vice president. Some put it simple. That he was vice president of our medical school on the right. With his knowledge to hold the job. Of course, is more than enough, but after the outbreak of the plague northeast. Z. The first thought that Wu Lianda. He believes that Wu Lianda should have sufficient capacity to combat the plague northeast. Later, he invited Wu Lianda coming out as epidemic prevention work. After Wu Lianda took on the task of prevention. Immediately to the northeast to see the first time. View to the northeast after. He decided to anatomical body. But he remains secretly anatomy. Why secretly to? Because, according to the precepts of the provisions of the Qing, chaos is not to dissect the body. Because it is called the desecration of the dead. So if you dare to do so, is to bear criminal responsibility. Wu Lianda actually risking the risk of infection by viruses. And afterwards the study of the criminal responsibility of pressure. Come and perform this secretly dissected body of work, but he did not so bad. After doing so, because he found said, this plague outbreak. No ordinary plague. It is a very special plague. Is called pneumonic plague. This pneumonic plague which can be transmitted by droplets. So this can be explained. Why not see the mouse? Yersinia pestis in the body but can pandemic. Because this pneumonic plague simply be human transmission. Wuhan now with pneumonia is exactly the same. So then after this discovery Wu Lianda. The first time he did prevention. He invented the 2 layers of gauze. Protective masks come and make their own. Later this masks. Also known as Wu's masks. Regarded as China's first mask. Because their people do. Let them from being infected with the plague. So when the government and the people also have to follow. Because of this inventive mask Wu Lianda, full of useful, cheap and easy to use, so we have this ubiquitous ball mask Xing. But Wu Lianda, after further study, said the discovery of plague. In fact, the Qing Dynasty will get plague. Really is the scapegoat. Why does the scapegoat this plague, because it is in fact true original, is mainly over Siberia marmot. So the beginning of this outbreak. Pneumonic plague location. In fact, Siberia. But at the time, the Russian Tsar know when this place happened plague. The first time he ordered. All the dead were all focused burned. After burning, he got sick of all the people all go home. There was a lot of Siberia. Is from the northeast to the workers to toil. So they finally had to return home northeast. The problem is that they return home northeast. Pneumonic plague is also the way to bring back. This brought back that human-to-human transmission, spit infection results, and causing the Northeast plague pandemic. So you do not think you have heard here. Qing Dynasty is really the scapegoat. Do you have? Good, but at this time. The Qing nobility. Although the judge heard Wu Lianda, but they also worry. Wu Lianda, in the end there is no real ability, let Dora layer insurance well. In addition, he has found a French physician. Look to the northeast, called Xiongnu. Xiongnu results, do not know if he was ignorant. The one to judge rejected Wu Lianda, while also follow Wu Lianda. The old traditional method of combating the plague to do. The problem is that if in accordance with originally plague traditional ways to do, then will only make more people pneumonic plague through infected droplets. So furious Wu Lianda. So he put down words. Well, you can if you do not follow my method, I would not care to take care of your own. That this way on the bad. Senior royal court of the Qing Dynasty. It is a dilemma faced, two choices. In the end you want to listen to the words of Xiongnu, or listen to the words of Wu Lianda. But later they are very smart. Paok when foreigners. After all, they think say. Foreigners for foreigners would be more familiar with well, they run to ask a person. This person is the British ambassador to Jordan. Jordan listened. After the royal question. They would scolding you fools. Why does he say? Wu Lianda he has. MD from the University of Cambridge's identity. You even do not believe him. What then wrote to a quack? Do not know if I have genuine talents Xiongnu. This is not that putting the cart before it. Because of Jordan reminded of this speech. Let Chang Wu Lianda believe the decision of judge. So then the full support of Wu Lianda. To carry out the work of epidemic prevention, so then Wu Lianda then to the northeast side. To carry out a wide range of prevention measures, including centralized buried isolation. There is out of control and so on. Wuhan is now epidemic prevention method with pneumonia. Almost. So these prevention methods you see, when the late Qing Wu Lianda almost always used, that such a practice would be reasonable. After the implementation period of time, should be able to a considerable degree of mitigation, right? But Wu Lianda accidentally discovered the death toll increased rather than decreased. How can that be possible? I have taken the most correct method of prevention. In accordance with the terms of the truth, should the number of infections or deaths will decline only so he thought it were onto something. So he himself particularly to the northeast side. Once again mining site. This look I realized that a big problem. Because the plague epidemic of pneumonic plague northeast. Just when the cold northeast. That we are not just talking about it. 191010. Do you know to what extent the cold northeast winter? 10-20 degrees of few. The soil frozen to simply digging up. Because digging up. So people had died. No way to put to rest him buried down. So how do not go digging? Focus on the disposal square. The problem is that pneumonic plague is spread through the air. You got sick of these bodies, all concentrated in this place, that is not to just being, has become the focus of plague yet. So then, after that Wu Lianda saw this situation, memorial immediately to the court, want the court to allow his body burned. Because the Qing imperative is not, provisions are not burning the remains of. The problem is the result. If you are burning the remains of words, that will lead to resentment of. Because all the people that want to rest in peace. So when some of the court, no knowledge of royal, Wu Lianda on scolding you this quack, the results at this critical moment. A man jumped out. Who does this come out? That's Prince Regent Li. Let's talk about carrying Li. He was the real ruler of the Qing Dynasty. But in fact, he has been fairly full powerless. But in this epidemic northeast, to spread the critical moment, he jumped out a word. He said, I am responsible for something burning. You hear this speech? Do you think this vehicle Li? There are no super bold. So good in fact, in the eyes of historians. In fact, Li is also full load powerless. But he was in his short, the ruling mediocre career, actually under such a bright, and the only decision making. It has also become commonplace among his political career. A few highlights. Okay, back to Wu Lianda. Wu Lianda get. After the support of Prince Regent Xili, began to focus on the bodies burned. People's resentment is very miserable. How we buried the dead. You actually put them to burn. Desecration of the deceased. You will die a natural death in the future. What terrible curse words are done, but to do so is to insist Wu Lianda. Of course we have to ask, have no effect. Oh there. After 2 months. Harbin there have been 0 death case. Then you now Shenyang, Changchun, also entered into 0 death case. 4 months later. All of the epidemic completely under control. No one has the pestilence. Members, did you find this plague? Just under Wu Lianda wise measures. Was brought under control and mitigation. So when the plague broke out northeast. In fact, when countries are very jittery. Because they do not know where the cause of. They are afraid to form. Once again the Black Death ravaged large. Therefore, all countries are watching. It also worried. There will be a similar thing happened again. Fortunately, Wu Lianda shot. Then save this calamity. So then the UK Medical Week to rave reviews Wu Lianda. It said Wu Lianda done for us all. We no longer reported. We will always be grateful to him. So you see this in the late Qing Wu Lianda. Is full of nameless did not. But his measures did go down in the history of the Qing. Also contributed to the Qing. Because if it is in accordance with reason, Qing should also like rats off the late Ming. The defeat was the plague. Fortunately, Wu Lianda promptly come to the rescue. Save this calamity. So then, Qing is not in such a plague. Real perish. A later time. It had resulted in the so-called Wuchang uprising, so talked about this place. I do not know whether you found say. Plague occurs mostly because of natural disasters. That is inevitable. But its spread or human disaster risk are often the result of man-made. So in the face of these outbreaks, in fact, we really want to, good to have the idea to do preventive vaccination. Do not have a heart fluke. Because many of the scourge are a little luck from the heart. It leads to the spread of the epidemic, which led to greater casualties. So talked about this place, that is also the way to remind each other to each other. This can be. Man-made plague caused casualties to a minimum. I do not know today to reverse the verdict of the plague. are also give you a refreshing, a careful bold hypothesis, reasonable doubt subversion history, Shen Qiping subversion history. Hello, we see you next time.